The North Atlantic Ocean, November 21st, 1916. Dawn breaks grey and cold over the waters off the Greek island of Kea. The hospital ship Britannic, sister to the doomed Titanic, shudders beneath your feet as explosions tear through her hull. Violet Jessop stands on the slanting deck, her white nurse's uniform pristine despite the chaos erupting around her. She is 29 years old. She has been here before. 4 years earlier, she had watched the Titanic slip beneath these same dark waters. 5 years before that, she had felt the Olympic's hull buckle after collision. Now as the Britannic lists further to starboard, Violet does what she has always done. She helps others first, but this time the sea has a different plan for her. As she lowers herself into lifeboat number 15, she clutches something precious against her chest. A baby barely a year old abandoned in the panic. The lifeboat hits the water hard, and suddenly they are being pulled toward the ship's massive propellers, still churning the sea into a deadly froth. Violet Jessop is about to discover that surviving disaster is only half the battle. Sometimes the real test comes in the aftermath, when the world moves on and you are left to carry the weight of all those who didn't make it home. This is not just a story about maritime disasters. This is a story about the ordinary people who become extraordinary not by choice, but by circumstance. About a woman who faced death 3 times and lived to tell about it, yet whose name you probably don't know. Welcome to a story of fate, resilience, and the quiet heroism of those history forgot. I'm your host, and today we meet Violet Jessop, the woman the sea couldn't claim. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment with the location you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're always fascinated to see how far these echoes of history travel, and at what hour of the day, Woodies or night, they find you. How does one person survive not 1, not 2, but 3 of the most catastrophic maritime disasters in history? Was it luck, divine intervention, or something else entirely that made Violet Jessop unsinkable? Let us go back to where it all began, to a farm in Argentina, where a young girl first learned that survival was not guaranteed, but earned. Bahia Blanca, Argentina, 1887. The pampa stretches endlessly in all directions, a sea of grass under an impossibly wide sky. Here in this remote corner of South America, Catherine Jessop gives birth to her first daughter. They name her Violet Constance. The Jessops are Irish immigrants, part of the great wave of Europeans seeking new lives in the New World. William Jessop works the land with calloused hands and stubborn determination, his weathered face bearing the marks of countless days under the Argentine sun. Catherine keeps house and tends to the growing family that will eventually number 9 children. Life is hard, but it is theirs. The farmhouse is small and simple, built of adobe and timber with a corrugated iron roof that drums with rain during the wet season. Catherine has done her best to make it feel like home, hanging lace curtains in the windows and placing wildflowers from the pampa in cracked ceramic vases. But there is no escaping the isolation of this place, the way the horizon seems to mock human ambition with its endless emptiness. Violet learns early that the world is not a gentle place. When she is just 2 years old, tuberculosis arrives like a thief in the night, settling in her lungs with deadly intent. The fever comes first, burning through her tiny body like wildfire. Then the cough, dry and harsh, that racks her small frame until she can barely breathe. The local doctor, when he finally arrives after a 3-day journey across the pampa, shakes his head gravely. Dr. Martinez has seen this before too many times. Children die from consumption all the time on the frontier. There is little medicine, less hope, and even fewer options for families who cannot afford expensive treatments in Buenos Aires. She is very small. Senora Jessop, he tells Catherine in his heavily accented English, very weak. You must prepare yourself for what may come. But Catherine Jessop has not traveled halfway around the world, endured the hardships of frontier life, and buried 2 children in the hard earth of the pampa to watch her firstborn daughter waste away without a fight. That night, as Violet's fever peaks and her breathing becomes labored, Catherine makes a decision that will shape both their destinies. She packs Violet and her younger siblings into a wagon and makes the long journey to the Sierras de la Ventana, where the air is thinner but cleaner, where the high altitude might give her daughter's damaged lungs a chance to heal. For 6 months they live in a canvas tent, pitched beside a mountain stream, surviving on what William can send and what Catherine can forage from the rocky slopes. It is a desperate gamble, one that nearly breaks the family financially and emotionally. Catherine nurses Violet through fever and delirium, holding her daughter through long nights when death seems to hover just outside the tent flaps. She feeds her broths made from wild herbs, bathes her in the cold mountain water, and never stops believing that somehow, impossibly, her little girl will survive. Violet does survive tuberculosis, but the disease leaves its mark. She will always be smaller than other children, more fragile in appearance though not in spirit. Her lungs bear scars that will never fully heal, making her susceptible to respiratory ailments for the rest of her life. But she learns something invaluable during those months in the mountains, that looking weak and being weak are entirely different things. When they return to the farm, Violet has changed. The fever dreams and mountain solitude have given her an inner toughness that surprises everyone who meets her. She helps Catherine with the household chores, tends to her younger siblings with surprising maturity, and never complains about the hard life they lead on the Argentine frontier. The years pass in the rhythm of frontier life. William struggles with poor harvests and falling prices for beef. Catherine bears more children, each birth a gamble in a place where medical care is scarce, and complications often prove fatal. The family grows but never prospers, always balanced on the knife's edge between survival and disaster. Violet grows, too, into a serious, observant child who seems older than her years. She learns to read from a Bible and a few precious books Catherine has brought from Ireland. She helps with the endless chores of farm life, milking cows, churning butter, tending the kitchen garden that provides most of their vegetables. But what she loves most are the evenings when the family gathers around the fire, and Catherine tells stories of the old country, of green hills and ancient castles, and a life so different from the vast emptiness of the pampa that it might as well be pure fantasy. When Violet turns 16, tragedy strikes the family like lightning on the open pampa. William Jessop dies suddenly of a heart attack while working in the fields, his body found hours later by neighbors who noticed his horse had returned without him. The funeral is a somber affair attended by the scattered community of Irish settlers, but afterward, Catherine faces the harsh reality of her situation. She is alone with 9 children, and debts that threaten to swallow their small farm whole. The bank in Bahia Blanca has already begun making inquiries about the mortgage payments. Local creditors, sympathetic but firm, need to be paid for seed and supplies. The options are few and stark. The family can scatter, the younger children placed in orphanages while the older ones seek work wherever they can find it. Or they can find another way to survive together. Catherine makes a decision that will shape her eldest daughter's destiny forever. They will leave Argentina and return to Europe, where Catherine believes she can find work to support the family. She has relatives in England, distant cousins who might help them establish themselves. It is a desperate plan, requiring them to sell everything they own and trust their futures to the uncertain mercy of strangers across an ocean. It is 1903. Violet is 16 years old when she first sets foot on the deck of an ocean liner, sailing from Buenos Aires to Liverpool with her entire family, crowded into steerage accommodations that make their farmhouse seem luxurious by comparison. The crossing takes 3 weeks, 21 days that will fundamentally change how Violet sees the world. While her mother tends to the younger children in the cramped, stuffy quarters below deck, Violet spends her time on deck whenever possible, watching the endless expanse of water that surrounds their ship like a blue desert. She is mesmerized by the ship itself. This floating city, that carries hundreds of souls across the vast Atlantic with such apparent ease. The crew moves with practiced efficiency, each man knowing his role in the complex ballet required to keep the vessel running smoothly. The first-class passengers stroll the promenade decks as if they own the ocean itself. Their elegant clothes and casual manner, speaking of lives, lived far from the harsh realities Violet has always known. But it is the stewardesses who capture her attention most completely. These women glide through the dining rooms with silver trays balanced perfectly, their uniforms crisp and their manner professional. They speak to passengers with respectful deference while maintaining their dignity, and they seem to belong to the ship in a way that passengers never could. There is something in their bearing, a quiet competence and unflappable calm that speaks to Violet in ways she cannot yet articulate. She doesn't know it yet, but she is watching her future unfold. Liverpool, England, 1903. The family settles in a cramped boarding house in one of the city's less fashionable districts, while Catherine searches for work. The building is a 4-story Victorian monstrosity that has seen better days. Its once grand facade now blackened with soot from the countless ships and factories that make Liverpool one of England's busiest ports. Their rooms are on the 3rd floor, 2 small chambers that must house all 9 children, plus Catherine. The walls are thin, the plumbing unreliable, and the cold seems to seep through the windows no matter how many blankets they pile against the glass. But it is shelter, and it is theirs, which is more than many immigrant families can claim. The younger children need schooling, clothing, food, all of which cost money the family doesn't have. Catherine finds work as a seamstress, taking in piecework that pays by the garment, and keeps her bent over her sewing machine from dawn until well past dark. Her hands, once soft despite the hard life on the pampa, become cracked and bleeding from constant work with needle and thread. The damp English climate is unkind to Catherine's lungs, already weakened by years of struggle and the lingering effects of repeated pregnancies. She develops a persistent cough that echoes through their small rooms at night, a sound that reminds Violet uncomfortably of her own childhood battle with tuberculosis. By the time Violet turns 21 in 1908, the family situation has grown desperate. Catherine can barely work anymore, her cough having developed into something more serious that no amount of patent medicine seems to cure. The younger children depend entirely on whatever income Violet and her older brothers can provide. But jobs for immigrants are scarce and poorly paid. It is then that Violet makes the choice that will define the rest of her life. She applies to work for the White Star Line as a stewardess. The year is 1908, and maritime service is not considered respectable work for young ladies of breeding. Stewardesses are viewed with suspicion by polite society, assumed to be women of questionable morals who work on ships because they cannot find proper employment on land. The work is hard, the hours long, and the pay modest at best. But Violet Jessop has never had the luxury of caring what polite society thinks. She needs the job. Her family needs the money, and something about those ships calls to her in a way she cannot quite explain. Something that began during that long crossing from Argentina and has grown stronger with each passing year. The White Star Line interviews are held in a stark office near the Liverpool docks, the air thick with tobacco smoke and the sound of ship horns echoing across the water. Violet sits with dozens of other young women, all of them desperate in their own ways. Some are widows trying to support young children. Others are daughters of impoverished families, seeking any respectable work that will allow them to send money home. Violet is small, quiet, not particularly striking in appearance. Her clothes are carefully mended but obviously second-hand, and she speaks with the slight accent of someone who learned English as a second language. When her turn comes for the interview, she sits straight-backed in the hard wooden chair and answers questions in a clear, steady voice. Something in her manner must impress the hiring manager, perhaps the calm way she describes caring for tubercular patients, or the steadiness of her gaze when discussing the challenges of working at sea. Whatever it is, she walks out of that smoke-filled office with a position aboard the RMS Celtic, one of White Star Line's older but reliable vessels. Her first voyage is a revelation. The work is indeed backbreaking. Cleaning cabins from dawn until well past midnight, serving meals to demanding passengers, tending to the seasick at all hours of the day and night. Her feet ache constantly from walking the ship's corridors. Her hands become raw from endless scrubbing, and she falls into her narrow bunk each night, too exhausted to think about anything but the next day's duties. But there is something magical about being at sea that makes all the hardship worthwhile. Standing on deck during her brief breaks, watching the sun rise and set over water that stretches to the horizon in every direction, Violet feels a peace she has never known on land. The ship becomes a world unto itself, complete and self-contained, carrying its cargo of human dreams and disappointments across the vast indifference of the ocean. Violet discovers she has a gift for the work that transcends mere competence. She is naturally calm in crisis, patient with difficult passengers, and possesses the kind of quiet efficiency that makes her invaluable to the ship's crew. When elderly passengers become ill, she tends them with the same gentle care she once gave her tubercular siblings. When homesick immigrants weep for the families they've left behind, she offers wordless comfort that somehow eases their pain. More importantly, she finds that she loves it. The rhythm of shipboard life, the constant challenge of serving hundreds of people while the vessel plows through all kinds of weather, the sense of purpose that comes from being an essential part of something larger than herself, all of it speaks to something deep in her character. By 1910, she has earned enough experience and trust to be assigned to larger, more prestigious ships. Her efficiency ratings are consistently excellent, her deportment beyond reproach. When the position opens on the newest jewel in the White Star Line's crown, she applies immediately. The ship is called the Olympic, and she is the largest moving object ever created by human hands. Southampton, England, June 14, 1911. The RMS Olympic sits at dock like a floating palace, her 4 towering funnels reaching toward the sky like the smokestacks of some massive factory devoted to luxury and speed. At 882 feet long and weighing 45,000 tons, she is a marvel of engineering. The first of White Star Line's new Olympic-class ships designed to be faster, larger and more luxurious than anything afloat. Violet Jessop stands on the dock with her single suitcase, the same battered leather case she has carried on every voyage for the past 3 years, looking up at the ship that will be her home for the next several months. At 24, she has become one of the most experienced stewardesses in the fleet, trusted with first-class passengers and delicate situations that require both discretion and skill. The Olympic represents the pinnacle of her career so far, a chance to work aboard the most advanced passenger ship in the world. She has no way of knowing that in just 3 months, this magnificent ship will give her the first taste of what fate has in store. Life aboard the Olympic is everything Violet had hoped for and more. The first-class accommodations are more luxurious than anything she experienced growing up on the Argentine pampa or in the crowded boarding houses of Liverpool. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across polished marble floors. The dining room serves 7-course meals on china, so fine it seems too delicate to actually use, while an army of waiters moves in choreographed precision around tables laden with silver and crystal. Violet's days are filled with attending to wealthy passengers who treat the crossing more like a floating house party than mere transportation. She helps ladies into elaborate evening gowns that cost more than her family's annual income, serves afternoon tea on silver trays heavy enough to require both hands, and listens to stories of lives so privileged they might as well be fairy tales. There is Mrs. Widener, the Philadelphia socialite who travels with 12 trunks and a personal maid. Colonel Gracie, the Civil War veteran who spends his days writing letters in the ship's library, and his evenings holding court in the smoking room. The Astors, whose very presence seems to elevate everyone around them to a higher social sphere, but it is the ship herself that truly captures Violet's heart. The Olympic is alive in ways that smaller vessels never were. She can feel the great engines thrumming through the deck plates beneath her feet, sense the ship's response to wind and wave through vibrations that travel up through her bones. At night, when her duties are finished and the passengers have retired to their staterooms, Violet sometimes stands at the stern and watches the wake stretch out behind them like a white road leading home. The ship moves through the water with a grace that seems impossible for something so massive. Her hull cuts through waves that would toss smaller vessels like toys, her 4 great propellers driving her forward at speeds that make the Atlantic seem like a pond rather than an ocean. September 20th, 1911. The Olympic is making her 5th voyage, steaming through the Solent near the Isle of Wight on what should be a routine approach to Southampton. Captain Edward Smith is on the bridge, the same man who will later captain the Titanic to its doom. The passengers are at lunch in the grand dining room, the crew busy with their afternoon duties as the ship prepares for arrival. Violet is in a first-class cabin helping Mrs. Cardwell, an elderly American passenger, pack her extensive wardrobe for disembarkation. The woman chatters continuously about her grandchildren in Boston, while Violet carefully folds silk dresses and wraps jewelry in tissue paper. It is then that she feels it. Not quite a shock, more like a shudder that runs through the ship's entire frame from bow to stern. The sensation is subtle but unmistakable to someone who has learned to read a ship's moods through her feet and hands. Violet pauses in her folding, listening intently as Mrs. Cardwell continues her monologue, apparently unaware that anything has happened. Then the engines stop. The sudden silence is deafening after 3 days of constant mechanical rhythm. In her cabin, Mrs. Cardwell finally notices something is wrong and looks at Violet with growing alarm. "My dear, what do you think?" But Violet is already moving toward the porthole, her training taking over. Through the thick glass, she can see other ships in the distance, including what appears to be a Royal Navy vessel uncomfortably close to their starboard side. On deck, chaos is beginning to unfold with the peculiar mix of panic and politeness that characterizes disaster among the upper classes. The HMS Hawke, a Royal Navy cruiser conducting maneuvers in the area, has collided with the Olympic's starboard side, tearing a massive gash in the hull near the engine room. Water is pouring in through the breach, but the ship's revolutionary watertight compartments are holding the damage in check. For now. Violet helps her passengers to the boat deck, maintaining the calm demeanor that has made her so valuable to the White Star Line. She assists elderly passengers into life jackets, reassures frightened children with gentle words and steady hands, and helps the crew organize what everyone hopes will prove to be an unnecessary evacuation. But as the minutes pass and reports filter up from below, it becomes clear that the Olympic will not sink. The watertight bulkheads, revolutionary technology that represents the cutting edge of naval architecture, are doing exactly what they were designed to do. The ship lists noticeably to starboard, but remains stable, her pumps working efficiently to control the flooding. After 3 hours of uncertainty, during which passengers and crew alike contemplate the possibility of abandoning ship in the middle of the English Channel, tugboats arrive to escort the wounded Olympic back to Southampton for extensive repairs. Violet's first disaster ends not in tragedy, but in testimony to the superiority of modern engineering and design. The Olympic-class ships, she is told repeatedly in the days that follow, are virtually unsinkable. Their watertight compartments can handle any conceivable damage, short of a direct torpedo hit or catastrophic explosion. The collision makes headlines around the world. Olympic nearly lost on 5th voyage, triumph of modern ship design. White Star Liner proves unsinkable. The stories focus on the miracle of survival, the vindication of new safety technologies, the proof that human ingenuity has finally conquered the sea's ancient hostility. Violet returns to shore unharmed, but fundamentally changed. She has felt a great ship shudder under the impact of disaster and watched passengers face the real possibility of death at sea. She has seen how quickly luxury and comfort can transform into fear and uncertainty, how thin the line really is between civilization and catastrophe. Most people would take such an experience as a warning. Perhaps it is time to find safer employment, away from the sea and its unpredictable dangers. Perhaps fate is sending a message that should not be ignored. But Violet Jessop is not most people. If anything, the collision with HMS Hawke has confirmed what she already suspected. She belongs on these ships. In moments of crisis, when others panic or freeze, she becomes exactly who she needs to be. She is exactly where she needs to be. When the White Star Line offers her a position on their newest ship, the Olympic sister vessel, even larger and more luxurious than her predecessor, Violet accepts without hesitation. The ship is called the RMS Titanic, and her maiden voyage is scheduled for April 10, 1912. Violet will be working in first class, tending to some of the wealthiest and most prominent people in the world as they cross the Atlantic in unprecedented comfort and style. She has no way of knowing that this next voyage will test not just her courage and competence, but her very will to survive. That the unsinkable ship will carry her into a nightmare that will haunt her for the rest of her long life. That the sea, having tasted her presence once, is not yet finished with her. Southampton, April 10, 1912. The RMS Titanic towers above, the dock like a moving mountain, her black hull gleaming with fresh paint, her superstructure rising 11 stories above the waterline in a display of engineering ambition that seems to mock the very concept of human limitation. She is 882 feet long, identical to her sister Olympic in length, but fitted with even more luxurious appointments and improved safety features. The press calls her the Ship of Dreams, and looking at her now, Violet can understand why. Violet Jessop walks up the gangway carrying the same battered suitcase she has carried on every voyage for the past 4 years. She is 25 years old now, a veteran stewardess whose calm competence and unflappable demeanor have earned her assignments on the most prestigious ships in the fleet. Her reputation precedes her, the young woman who helped evacuate passengers during the Olympic collision, who never lost her composure even when disaster seemed imminent. She has survived one maritime emergency already. The collision between the Olympic and HMS Hawke has become part of her personal mythology within White Star Line circles, proof that she can handle whatever the sea throws at her. But as she settles into her tiny cabin deep in the ship's belly, surrounded by the familiar sounds of a great vessel preparing for departure, she cannot shake an odd feeling of unease. The Titanic is magnificent. There is no question of that. Her first-class accommodations are more like luxury hotel suites than ship cabins, complete with private bathrooms, 4-poster beds, and sitting rooms decorated in period furniture that would not be out of place in a London mansion. The grand staircase, with its ornate clock topped by a bronze figure of honor and glory crowning time, is a work of art that takes Violet's breath away every time she passes it. The dining room can seat 554 people at once, served by an army of waiters and stewards moving in choreographed precision around tables set with the finest china, crystal and silver money can buy. There is a gymnasium equipped with the latest exercise equipment, a swimming pool tiled in blue and white, even a squash court for passengers who wish to maintain their fitness during the crossing. But there is something different about this ship, something Violet cannot quite identify. Perhaps it is the way Captain Smith speaks of this being his final voyage before retirement, his millionaire's special, as he calls it, with a mixture of pride and melancholy. Perhaps it is the unusual number of wealthy and prominent passengers on board, more concentrated wealth than has ever traveled together on a single vessel. Or perhaps it is simply the weight of expectations that seems to press down on everyone from the captain to the most junior crew member. The press has dubbed the Titanic unsinkable, and such hubris has always made Violet nervous. She has lived through enough hardship to know that fate does not appreciate being challenged so boldly. Among the passengers are names that regularly appear in society columns and business sections of newspapers around the world. Colonel Archibald Gracie, the Civil War historian and New York socialite. Benjamin Guggenheim, the mining heir whose fortune is measured in tens of millions. Isidore and Ida Strauss, who built Macy's department store into a commercial empire. Margaret Brown, the Colorado mining heiress, whose forthright manner and generous spirit will soon earn her the nickname the Unsinkable Molly Brown. These are people accustomed to being protected from life's harsher realities by walls of money and privilege, individuals who move through the world confident that their wealth can shield them from the kind of disasters that befall ordinary people. Violet tends to them all with professional courtesy, but she finds herself most drawn to the women traveling alone or with children. Passengers like Mrs. Allison, traveling with her young children and their nurse, or the Sage family, emigrating to America with dreams of a better life. She recognizes something of herself in their guarded independence, their quiet strength. These are women who have learned, as she has, that survival often depends on your own resources rather than the promises of others. The first 3 days of the voyage pass in blissful routine that seems to justify every superlative that has been heaped upon the great ship. The weather is unusually calm for April in the North Atlantic, the sea like glass reflecting a sky so clear it seems artificial. Passengers stroll the promenade decks in the afternoon sun, take tea in the elegant Café Parisien with its ivy-covered walls and wicker furniture, and dance late into the night in the ship's palm-lined reception room to music provided by the finest orchestra ever assembled on a passenger vessel. The Titanic seems to glide across the Atlantic as if the ocean were merely a highway built specifically for her passage. Her massive engines drive her forward at a steady 22 knots, eating up the miles between Southampton and New York, with mechanical precision that makes the crossing feel more like a luxury cruise than a serious voyage. April 14th, 1912, Sunday. The temperature begins dropping as evening approaches, a reminder that spring comes late to the North Atlantic and that ice is always a concern during this season. But the sea remains eerily calm, without even the smallest waves to break the mirror-smooth surface that reflects the emerging stars. There is no moon tonight, making the darkness unusually complete once the sun disappears below the horizon. In the crow's nest 90 feet above the main deck, lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee strain their eyes for any sign of danger ahead. Peering into blackness so absolute it seems solid, they have no binoculars. The binoculars that should be in the crow's nest were locked away in a cabinet before departure, and in the confusion of getting the ship ready for her maiden voyage, no one has remembered to provide the key. Fleet and Lee must rely on their naked eyes alone to spot hazards in conditions that would challenge even the most experienced seamen. Violet finishes her evening duties at 11:30 p.m., having spent the last several hours helping first-class passengers prepare for what everyone assumes will be another peaceful night at sea. Mrs. Widener has retired early with a headache. The Astors are in their luxurious suite, probably reading or playing cards. The younger passengers have finally left the reception room. Their evening of dancing and flirtation concluded. She retreats to her tiny cabin, exhausted after a day of constant service, but satisfied with work well done. The ship's engines provide a steady, comforting rhythm that has become the soundtrack of her life over the past 4 years. The sound is so familiar, so reassuring, that she often uses it as a lullaby to help her fall asleep. At 11:40 p.m., that rhythm stops. The silence wakes her instantly. After 4 years at sea, Violet's body has become attuned to every sound, every vibration of ship life. The sudden absence of the great engine's steady beat is as jarring as a fire alarm. She lies in her narrow bunk for a moment, listening to the unfamiliar quiet, trying to convince herself that this is just a routine stop for some minor mechanical adjustment. But she knows better. Ships like the Titanic don't just stop in the middle of the Atlantic without good reason. She dresses quickly, pulling on her uniform and making sure her life jacket is easily accessible. As she steps into the corridor, other crew members are emerging from their cabins, confusion and concern written on their faces. Someone mentions ice, a collision, but the ship seems stable enough. There is no immediate sense of panic, no indication that anything truly serious has happened. On deck, the scene is almost surreal in its casualness. Passengers stand around in evening clothes and nightgowns, some still holding champagne glasses from the interrupted parties below. Many are laughing, treating the whole event as an amusing diversion from the routine of shipboard life. Some are playfully throwing chunks of ice at each other, ice that has fallen onto the forward decks from the bergs passing, souvenirs of the ship's encounter with nature's indifference. But Violet notices things that others miss or choose to ignore. The way the ship sits slightly lower in the water than she did an hour ago, the bow riding deeper with each passing minute, the barely perceptible list to starboard that grows more pronounced as she watches, the tense conversations between officers who think they are speaking quietly enough not to be overheard, but whose worried faces betray the gravity of the situation. Captain Smith appears on the bridge at midnight, still in evening dress, but with his face set in grim lines that speak of terrible knowledge. He confers urgently with Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, who has been below taking measurements and calculating flooding rates with the desperate precision of a man who knows exactly what those numbers mean. After 20 minutes of increasingly urgent discussion, Smith gives the order that no captain ever wants to give. The command that transforms a routine voyage into a fight for survival. Uncover the lifeboats. The mathematics of disaster are brutally simple. The Titanic carries 20 lifeboats of various sizes, enough for 1,178 people under ideal conditions. There are 2,224 souls on board tonight, passengers and crew whose lives now depend on the orderly evacuation of a sinking ship in conditions that are anything but ideal. Violet springs into action, her training and natural competence taking over. She moves through the first-class sections with calm efficiency, helping passengers into life jackets, guiding them toward the boat deck, speaking reassuringly, even as her own heart pounds with growing dread. She knows ships, understands the sea, and she can read the signs that others are still choosing to ignore. The Titanic is dying, and everyone aboard her is now in mortal danger. The evacuation proceeds with fatal slowness, hampered by disbelief, social conventions, and the simple human inability to comprehend that something so magnificent and seemingly solid could actually be vulnerable to destruction. Many passengers refuse to leave the warm, well-lit ship for small boats bobbing on the dark ocean. The first lifeboats are lowered with empty seats, their occupants convinced they will be back on board within hours once this minor emergency is resolved. Women and children first, the age-old law of the sea. But even that fundamental principle is complicated by class distinctions and social expectations. First-class passengers are closer to the boat deck and have crew members to guide them. Third-class passengers, housed deep in the ship's belly, must navigate unfamiliar corridors and locked gates that separate them from the upper decks. As the night progresses, the ship's list becomes more pronounced, and even the most optimistic passengers begin to understand that this is not a drill. Water cascades down the grand staircase like a waterfall, turning the ship's most beautiful feature into a monument to the power of the sea. The lights, miraculously, continue to burn as the ship's band plays on, their music providing a soundtrack of dignity to the unfolding catastrophe. Violet finds herself assigned to lifeboat number 16 on the port side, one of the larger boats designed to hold 65 people. As one of the crew, she is expected to help row and take charge of passengers once they reach the water. She stands at the edge of the boat deck, looking back at the great ship that has been her home and workplace for the past 3 months. The Titanic is clearly dying now, her bow buried so deep in the water that the forward well deck is completely submerged. The mathematical certainty of her doom is written in the angle of her decks, the way her stern rises higher with each passing minute as more water pours into her forward compartments. In perhaps an hour, maybe less, she will be gone. At 1:40 a.m., lifeboat 16 is lowered toward the black water of the North Atlantic. There are 50 people crowded into a boat designed for 65, mostly women and children who sob quietly in the darkness or sit in stunned silence as the reality of their situation begins to sink in. As they are lowered away from the ship's side, Violet takes her turn at the oars, her small hands already growing numb in the frigid air. The water, when they reach it, is like black glass, so calm it seems unnatural. The temperature is 28 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to kill a person in minutes. As they row away from the dying ship, Violet can hear the sounds of panic beginning to spread among those still aboard. Shouts of fear, the crash of deck chairs being thrown into the water, the growing clamor of people who have finally realized that death is no respecter of wealth or social position. Behind them, the Titanic's lights blaze against the star-filled sky like a floating city refusing to acknowledge its own mortality. The band is still playing, ragtime melodies that seem absurdly cheerful under the circumstances, then hymns that carry across the water with heartbreaking poignancy. People are beginning to jump from the decks now, their bodies hitting the water with sounds that will haunt the survivors forever. At 2:17 a.m., the ship's lights flicker and go out, plunging the Titanic into darkness. For a moment, she is just a black shape against the stars, her outline barely visible. Then, with a sound like the world breaking apart, she splits in two just forward of the third funnel. The bow section disappears immediately, taking with it hundreds of people who are still trapped inside. The stern section remains afloat for another 3 minutes, rising almost vertically from the water as its contents, furniture, machinery, people, cascade into the sea with a roar that carries for miles across the still night air. At 2:20 a.m., the RMS Titanic disappears beneath the surface of the North Atlantic, leaving behind a debris field and more than 1,500 people struggling in water so cold it stops the heart within minutes. The screams that follow carry across the calm sea for nearly an hour, the voices of 1,500 people dying in the darkness, calling for help that cannot reach them, crying out names of loved ones who may already be dead. It is a sound that penetrates the soul and remains there forever, a reminder of how quickly human civilization can dissolve into primordial terror. Violet sits in lifeboat 16, rowing mechanically through water littered with deck chairs, lifebelts, and the bodies of people who believed until the very last moment that someone would save them. She has survived her second maritime disaster in less than a year, but this time, survival feels more like punishment than blessing. As dawn breaks grey and cold over the North Atlantic and the rescue ship Carpathia appears on the horizon, Violet realizes that she will carry this night with her forever. The sound of 1,500 people dying, the sight of the greatest ship ever built breaking apart like a toy, the weight of living when so many others did not. She does not yet know that the sea is still not finished with her, that her appointment with maritime disaster has one more chapter yet to be written. Liverpool, England, May 1912. The survivors of the Titanic disaster return to a world that has been fundamentally changed by the tragedy that claimed 1,500 lives in a single night. The unsinkable ship lies broken on the ocean floor 2.5 miles down, and the very idea of maritime safety, indeed, of human progress itself, has been called into question by the disaster. Violet Jessop stands on the same dock where she first began her career with the White Star Line 4 years earlier, watching the great ships come and go with their cargoes of hope and ambition. She carries the same battered suitcase, wears the same carefully mended clothes, but everything else about her has changed in fundamental ways that she is only beginning to understand. She has looked into the face of catastrophe twice now and lived to tell about it. The experience has marked her in ways that will never fully heal, not the physical scars, for she bears none, but the invisible wounds that come from surviving when so many others did not. She wakes in the night, hearing the screams of 1,500 people dying in water so cold it stopped their hearts within minutes. She finds herself counting lifeboats whenever she sees a ship, calculating survival odds with the grim precision of someone who knows how quickly everything can go wrong. The press calls her one of the miracle survivors, though the word miracle seems cruel when applied to something that killed so many innocent people. Newspapers want interviews, photographs, personal accounts of what it felt like to watch the greatest ship ever built disappear into the darkness. Reporters camp outside her family's boarding house, offering money for exclusive stories about the night the unsinkable ship sank. But Violet has nothing to say to them. What words could possibly capture the sound of 1,500 people dying? How do you explain the weight of survival when so many others, people with families, dreams, futures that will never be realized, did not? The reporters eventually give up and move on to other survivors, other stories, other tragedies that will sell newspapers and satisfy the public's appetite for disaster. Her family in England welcomes her home with relief and deep concern. Her mother, Catherine, now seriously ill with tuberculosis that has progressed beyond the reach of any medicine available to working-class families, begs her daughter to find employment on land. Surely, she argues with the logic of a mother who has already lost too much. 2 maritime disasters are enough for any one person. Surely Violet has earned the right to a safer, quieter life, away from the sea and its terrible unpredictability. Catherine has aged visibly in the weeks since news of the Titanic reached Liverpool. Her cough has worsened, and there is a fragility about her that speaks of a woman whose strength has been tested beyond endurance. She looks at her eldest daughter with eyes full of love and fear, seeing in Violet's survival not a blessing, but a warning that fate's patience has limits. But as the weeks pass and the immediate shock of the disaster begins to fade, Violet finds herself drawn again and again to the Southampton docks. She watches the great ships come and go, their holds full of passengers who trust their lives to steel and steam and human competence. The Olympic, sister to the doomed Titanic, has returned to service after modifications to her lifeboat capacity. New ships slide down the ways, each one proclaimed safer than its predecessors. The sea calls to her in ways she cannot explain to her worried family or even fully understand herself. It is not that she has forgotten the horror of that April night, or that she has somehow made peace with the arbitrary nature of survival. Rather, she has discovered something about herself in those lifeboats, something that will not let her rest on land. The truth is that Violet Jessop has found her purpose in moments of ultimate crisis, when death seems certain and hope appears lost, when others panic or freeze or succumb to despair. She becomes someone extraordinary, not a hero in the conventional sense. She has no desire for glory or recognition, but something perhaps more valuable, a person others can depend on when everything else fails. When the White Star Line quietly offers her a position on another ship, she surprises herself by declining. But not because she fears the sea or wants to abandon her maritime career. Instead, she has received a different kind of offer, one that speaks to something deeper than her love of ocean travel. World War I is raging across Europe with an intensity and brutality that surpasses anything in human history. Millions of young men are dying in trenches from the English Channel to the Swiss border, cut down by machine guns, poison gas and artillery barrages that turn the landscape into a moonscape of mud and death. The casualty lists grow longer each day, and hospitals throughout Britain are overwhelmed with wounded soldiers who need immediate medical care. The British Red Cross is recruiting experienced maritime personnel to serve on hospital ships, vessels that will sail into dangerous waters to evacuate wounded soldiers from battlefield aid stations and transport them to proper medical facilities. It is dangerous work. Hospital ships, despite their protected status under international law and the Geneva Convention, are increasingly targets for enemy submarines and mines. The pay is poor, the conditions harsh, the risk enormous. But for the first time since stepping off the Carpathia in New York, Violet feels called to something larger than her own survival. She applies immediately. In 1915, she enrolls in an intensive Red Cross training program that teaches her to assist with medical procedures, tend to wounded soldiers, and work under the kind of pressure that would break most people. She learns to change dressings on wounds that would make a civilian faint, to hold steady when amputations are being performed in makeshift operating theaters, to provide comfort to young men who are dying far from home and family. But Violet has been broken before, by tuberculosis as a child, by poverty and uncertainty as a young woman, by the screams of the dying in the North Atlantic darkness. Each time she has rebuilt herself stronger than before, more capable of bearing burdens that would crush someone who had not learned early that survival is earned, not guaranteed. Her first assignment is aboard the hospital ship Asturias, a converted passenger liner that ferries wounded soldiers from the disastrous Gallipoli campaign back to hospitals in England and Scotland. The work is heartbreaking but necessary, a chance to save lives rather than simply survive disaster. The wounded arrive on stretchers carried by men who are themselves barely able to walk, casualties of a campaign that has turned into a bloody stalemate, costing thousands of lives for gains measured in yards. Young men arrive with missing limbs, blinded by poison gas, shattered by shrapnel and bullets and the simple, terrible mathematics of industrial warfare. They come bearing wounds both visible and invisible, their bodies broken, but their spirits often intact, in ways that humble and inspire everyone who cares for them. Violet tends to them all with the same calm competence she once brought to serving tea in first-class dining rooms. She changes bandages on wounds that never seem to heal properly, holds hands of soldiers who cry for mothers they will never see again, writes letters home for men whose wounds prevent them from doing so themselves. She becomes, for many of these young men, the last kind face they will see before morphine takes away their pain, or death finally claims them. The work changes her in ways that go beyond the obvious development of medical skills. On the Titanic, she witnessed disaster strike randomly, claiming lives without regard for virtue or vice, wealth or poverty. On the hospital ships, she sees young men who have volunteered to sacrifice everything for principles they believe in, soldiers who joke about their wounds while planning for futures they may never live to see. It is during her service on the Asturias that Violet first hears about the newest addition to the White Star Line's fleet of hospital ships. The HMHS Britannic, sister ship to both the Olympic and the ill-fated Titanic, has been converted from luxury liner to floating hospital before she ever carried a paying passenger. She is larger than the Titanic, fitted with the most advanced safety features that modern engineering can devise. Her watertight compartments have been enhanced based on lessons learned from her sister's loss. Her lifeboat capacity has been increased to handle everyone aboard, plus a substantial safety margin. She is, the Admiralty assures everyone, with the confidence of people who have not yet learned to be humble before the sea, the safest ship afloat. When a position opens aboard the Britannic, Violet requests the transfer without hesitation. She tells herself it is simply a career move, a chance to serve on a larger, more modern vessel where she can help even more wounded soldiers. But the truth is more complicated than that, more personal and perhaps more dangerous to her emotional well-being. The Britannic represents something to her that she cannot fully articulate, a chance to confront the ghosts of the Titanic on a ship that shares her DNA, but not her fate. Perhaps Violet thinks in moments of painful honesty, serving on the Britannic will finally allow her to put the nightmare of April 15th, 1912 to rest. Perhaps she can prove to herself that the Titanic disaster was an aberration, a once-in-a-lifetime convergence of bad luck and human error that will never be repeated. She has no way of knowing that the sea still has unfinished business with her, that her name appears on some cosmic passenger list that fate has not yet finished reading. On November 12, 1916, the HMHS Britannic departs Southampton on what will be her 6th voyage as a hospital ship. Her destination is the Greek island of Moudros, where she will collect wounded soldiers from the continuing disaster of the Gallipoli campaign and transport them to hospitals where their lives might yet be saved. Violet Jessop is on board, serving as both stewardess and nurse, her dual training making her invaluable to a vessel that must function simultaneously as luxury liner and medical facility. At 29, she has become a veteran of disaster, a woman who has learned to live with the constant possibility of death while maintaining her ability to comfort others. As the Britannic steams through the English Channel and into the Bay of Biscay, heading for the Mediterranean, and her appointment with wounded soldiers, Violet stands at the same rail where she once watched the lights of the Titanic disappear forever. The water below is different, blue instead of black, warm instead of freezing, but she cannot shake the feeling that she has been here before, that she will be here again, that the sea, having claimed her attention twice already, is not yet finished with its lesson. The Aegean Sea, November 21st, 1916. Dawn breaks crystal clear over waters that seem almost impossibly blue after the grey Atlantic of Violet's nightmares. The HMHS Britannic steams steadily through the morning calm, her white hull and prominent red crosses gleaming in the Mediterranean sun like symbols of hope in a world gone mad with war. Violet stands at the rail of the hospital ship, watching the Greek islands drift past like ancient dreams, barely disturbing the wine-dark sea that Homer once sang about. At 29, she has been at sea for 8 years, survived 2 maritime disasters, and served through 18 months of the most brutal war in human history. She has seen enough death and destruction to last several lifetimes, yet here she is again, drawn back to the element that has both threatened and sustained her. The Britannic is magnificent, even more impressive than her sister ships in ways that go beyond mere size and luxury. At 903 feet long, she is actually larger than the Titanic, but her conversion to a hospital ship has given her a noble purpose that the original luxury liner never possessed. Her staterooms have been transformed into wards capable of treating over 3,000 wounded soldiers simultaneously. Her dining rooms now serve as operating theaters where surgeons work around the clock to save lives, shattered by the mechanized brutality of modern warfare. Every detail of the ship's conversion speaks to lessons learned from the Titanic disaster. Her lifeboat capacity has been increased far beyond legal requirements. Her watertight compartments have been enhanced with additional safety features. Her crew has been trained in evacuation procedures that account for patients who cannot walk, men on stretchers who will require assistance to reach the boat deck if emergency strikes. But Violet cannot escape the eerie familiarity of everything around her. Walking the corridors is like moving through a dream where the same story plays out again and again, with only the surface details changed. The same White Star Line craftsmanship, the same engine rhythms thrumming through the deck plates, the same sense of being contained within a floating world that moves according to its own laws and logic. This morning feels different, though charged with a tension that has nothing to do with the war raging across Europe, or the wounded soldiers they are sailing to collect. The ship is empty of patients on this outbound voyage, heading to collect casualties from battle zones. But even the vacant wards seem to echo with unspoken dread. Violet tries to shake off her unease by focusing on her duties. She checks medical supplies, prepares beds for the wounded they will soon be carrying, reviews procedures with other members of the medical staff. But the feeling persists, a sense of standing at the edge of something terrible and inevitable. At 8:12 a.m., Violet is in the first-class lounge, now converted to a nurse's station, where medical staff coordinate patient care and maintain records. She is reviewing supply inventories with Sister Catherine, one of the Red Cross nurses who has become a friend during their month serving together, when she feels it. Not the grinding collision of the Olympic with HMS Hawk, metal against metal in a dance of human error. Not the glancing blow of iceberg against steel that sealed the Titanic's fate through the accumulated weight of small mistakes. This is something else entirely, a massive explosion that lifts the entire ship out of the water and slams her back down with bone-jarring force that sends everyone sprawling to the Britannic has struck a mine. For a moment, there is absolute silence as 1,500 people aboard the ship, crew, medical staff, a few military personnel, try to process what has just happened. The explosion seemed to come from below and forward, somewhere near the bow where such damage would be most catastrophic. Then the emergency bells begin to ring, their urgent clamor echoing through corridors that are suddenly filled with the ominous sound of rushing water. Violet moves on pure instinct, her training from 2 previous disasters taking over. She has been here before, knows the terrible arithmetic of disaster at sea, the weight of water against human engineering, the relentless mathematics that determine whether a ship will swim or sink. But this time feels different from both her previous experiences. The Britannic was designed to survive what killed her sister ship. Her watertight compartments are more advanced, her pumps more powerful, her safety systems improved based on painful lessons learned in the North Atlantic. She should be able to survive even catastrophic damage to her forward sections. The Olympic proved that these ships could take tremendous punishment and remain afloat. Should-be Captain Charles Bartlett appears on the bridge within minutes of the explosion, his face grim as damage reports begin flooding in from throughout the ship. The explosion has torn a massive hole in the ship's starboard side near the bow, flooding multiple compartments with thousands of tons of seawater. But the watertight doors have sealed automatically. The pumps are working at full capacity, and the ship's list, while noticeable, remains manageable. For 30 precious minutes, it seems as if the Britannic might survive this latest test. Her improved design appears to be working exactly as intended, validating the confidence of naval architects who believed they had finally conquered the sea's ancient hostility. Violet allows herself to hope that perhaps this time will be different, that perhaps the third ship will not follow her sisters to the bottom of the sea. Then someone makes a decision that transforms survival into catastrophe. In an attempt to beach the ship on nearby Kia Island, a desperate but potentially sound strategy that might save both ship and lives, Captain Bartlett orders the engines restarted at full ahead. The logic seems sound. If they can reach shallow water before the flooding overwhelms the pumps, they might ground the ship safely and save both vessel and crew. But the forward motion proves fatal. The massive hole in the bow acts like a scoop, forcing thousands of additional tons of water into the ship with each minute of forward progress. The compartments that had been successfully sealed are overwhelmed by the increased pressure. The pumps, adequate to handle a stationary flooding situation, cannot cope with the dynamic forces created by the ship's movement through the water. The Britannic's list increases dramatically as water cascades from one compartment to another, and it becomes clear to anyone who understands ships that she is going to sink. The question is no longer whether but how quickly, and whether there will be enough time to evacuate everyone safely. This time, there is no chaos, no confusion about the severity of the situation. The lessons of the Titanic have been learned too well, purchased with too high a price in human life to be ignored. The order to abandon ship comes quickly and is executed with military efficiency that would be admirable under any other circumstances. But the Britannic is sinking faster than the Titanic did, her larger size and more extensive flooding working against her. Where the unsinkable ship took 2 hours and 40 minutes to disappear beneath the North Atlantic, her younger sister will be gone in less than an hour. Violet finds herself assigned to lifeboat 15 on the starboard side, helping to coordinate the evacuation of Red Cross nurses and medical staff who have served aboard the ship for months. As they prepare to lower the boat, checking and rechecking the falls and davits that will carry them safely to the water below, she notices something that will haunt her for the rest of her life. Abandoned in the chaos of evacuation, a baby lies crying in a deck chair near the boat station. The infant appears to be about a year old, dressed in a simple white gown that suggests it belongs to one of the crew families rather than military personnel. How it came to be alone on the deck of a sinking hospital ship, where its parents might be, why no one else has noticed its presence. These questions flash through Violet's mind in the seconds it takes her to make a decision that requires no conscious thought. Without hesitation, she scoops up the baby and clutches it to her chest as lifeboat 15 is prepared for lowering. She has no idea who the child belongs to. No time to search for parents who may already be in other boats or trapped below decks. All she knows is that she cannot leave it behind to face whatever comes next alone. The lifeboat hits the water with a jarring impact that sends spray cascading over everyone aboard. Immediately, they face a new terror that no amount of training or experience could have prepared them for. The Britannic's massive propellers are still turning, creating a powerful suction that pulls the small boats inexorably toward the ship's stern like leaves caught in a whirlpool. If they cannot row clear in time, they will be pulled into the churning bronze blades and chopped to pieces. Violet rows with desperate strength, the baby pressed against her shoulder with one arm while she pulls at her oar with the other. Around them, other boats struggle with the same deadly current, their occupants rowing with the frantic energy of people who know that exhaustion means death. Some boats make it to safety beyond the reach of the propellers. Others are not so fortunate, disappearing into the foam and fury of the great screws, with sounds that will echo in survivors' nightmares for decades to come. At 9:07 a.m., exactly 55 minutes after the explosion that sealed her fate, the HMHS Britannic rolls over onto her side and sinks stern first into 400 feet of blue Aegean water. She takes with her any remaining pretense that modern ships are truly unsinkable, though miraculously, only 30 people die in the disaster, a testament to the lessons learned from the Titanic tragedy and the improved safety procedures those lessons inspired. Violet sits in the lifeboat, still holding the baby, who has somehow remained calm throughout the ordeal, watching the third White Star Line ship of her career disappear beneath the waves. She is numb now beyond shock or fear or even grief, moving into that strange psychological territory occupied by people who have witnessed too much disaster to process it all at once. 3 ships, 3 disasters. 3 times she has watched everything around her collapse into chaos and death, and 3 times she has survived when others did not. The mathematics of such survival seem impossible. The odds so astronomical that she begins to wonder if she is somehow cursed to witness these catastrophes, doomed to carry the memories of maritime disasters, while others are allowed the mercy of dying with their ships. The baby in her arms begins to cry, its small voice cutting through her dark thoughts and bringing her back to the immediate present. This child is alive, dependent on her care and protection, a reminder that survival is not just about enduring disaster, but about what you do afterward, about how you honor the memory of those who were not so fortunate. Fishing boats from Kia Island appear on the horizon within 2 hours, their crews having seen the smoke and steam of the sinking ship. As Violet is helped aboard one of the small vessels, still clutching the baby whose parents may never be found, she makes a decision that will define the rest of her life. She is done with the sea. After 3 maritime disasters in 5 years, After watching two of the greatest ships ever built break apart and sink, after rowing away from more death and destruction than any person should have to witness, Violet Jessop finally accepts that perhaps fate is trying to tell her something that she has been too stubborn or too addicted to the ocean's call to hear. Perhaps it is time to find a different way to live, a safer path that does not involve trusting her life to steel hulls and human engineering in places where help is hundreds of miles away. But as the fishing boat carries her toward the safety of land, the baby quiet now in her arms, Violet cannot know that the sea is still not finished with her, that despite her decision to seek safety on solid ground, the ocean will call to her again and again throughout her long life, offering her chances to return to the element that has both threatened and sustained her, that being unsinkable is not just about surviving disaster, but about finding the courage to keep living afterward, to keep serving others, even when service carries the risk of witnessing more tragedy than any human heart should have to bear. The waves that claimed the Olympic's innocence, the Titanic's hubris, and the Britannic's hope could not claim Violet Jessop. But they could not release her either. She would carry their stories with her for the rest of her days, a living memory of disaster and survival, of human frailty, and the enduring power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when everything else fails. London, England, 1971. An elderly woman sits in a modest apartment in Maida Vale, her weathered hands holding a fountain pen as she writes in a leather-bound journal, with the careful precision of someone who has learned that words, once written, carry weight that must be respected. At 84, Violet Jessop moves slowly, but with the same quiet determination that has carried her through 8 decades of extraordinary life. She is writing her memoirs, though she doubts anyone will want to read them. After all, who remembers the stewardess who survived the Titanic, the nurse who lived through the Britannic disaster, the woman who watched 3 of the greatest ships ever built slip beneath the waves? The world has moved on from those distant maritime tragedies, replaced them with newer disasters, fresher horrors, more immediate concerns. 2 world wars have reshaped civilization beyond recognition. Men have walked on the moon, making the idea of being impressed by a mere ocean liner seem quaint and antiquated. The great ships that once ruled the seas have been replaced by jet aircraft that cross the Atlantic in hours rather than days, reducing the romance of sea travel to a footnote in the history of human transportation. But Violet remembers everything with the clarity that sometimes comes to the very old, as if proximity to death sharpens the focus on what has gone before. She remembers the sound of 1,500 people dying in the North Atlantic darkness, their voices carrying across water so still it seemed like black glass. She remembers the baby she clutched to her chest as the Britannic sank beneath the blue waters of the Aegean, the weight of that small life in her arms and the terrible responsibility of keeping it safe when everything else was falling apart. She remembers the faces of wounded soldiers she tended on hospital ships during the Great War, young men whose names she carefully wrote in letters home to mothers who would never see their sons again, boys who joked about their wounds while planning for futures they would never live to see, who died holding her hand because she was the closest thing to comfort available to them in their final moments. Most of all, she remembers the weight of survival, the peculiar guilt that comes with living when so many others did not. The question that has haunted her for nearly 60 years, why me? Why was she spared when people better, braver, more deserving perished in disasters that seemed to select their victims with the random cruelty of natural forces? After the Britannic disaster, Violet did try to leave the sea behind, just as she had promised herself in that lifeboat off Kia Island. She worked briefly as a private nurse in London, tending to wealthy patients in their Belgravia mansions, people whose greatest health crises were self-inflicted ailments brought on by too much rich food and too little meaningful activity. The work was safe, well-paid, and utterly predictable. Her patients were demanding but not life-threateningly ill. There were no explosions in the night, no lifeboats to load, no screaming in the darkness as people died in water too cold for human survival. She should have been grateful for the peace, the stability, the blessed ordinariness of a life lived on solid ground. But the call of deep water proved stronger than her desire for safety. Within 2 years, she was back aboard ocean liners, working first for the Red Star Line and later returning to the White Star Line that had been both her salvation and her curse. Something in her blood, some fundamental aspect of her character, would not let her rest on land for long. She sailed through the 1920s and 1930s, watching the world change from the deck of great ships that carried the dreams and ambitions of passengers seeking new lives in new places. She worked aboard the Majestic, which became the largest ship in the world after the Titanic's loss, serving passengers who treated ocean travel as the height of sophistication and luxury. She served on luxury liners that carried movie stars and millionaires, diplomats and industrialists, immigrants and refugees, all of them trusting their lives to the same fundamental principles of engineering and seamanship that had failed so catastrophically. On that April night in 1912, she witnessed the gradual decline of the great age of ocean travel as aviation technology advanced, making sea voyages seem slow and antiquated compared to the speed and efficiency of modern aircraft. Throughout it all, passengers and crew would sometimes recognize her name, remember the stories of the woman who survived the Titanic and lived to serve at sea for decades afterward. But as the years passed, those who remembered the disaster firsthand became fewer, replaced by new generations for whom the Titanic was history rather than lived experience. New disasters captured the world's attention: the Great War, the influenza pandemic, the economic collapse of 1929, the rise of fascism in Europe. The Titanic became history, then legend, then entertainment, for people who had never known the fear of being alone on a dark ocean with nothing but a small boat between them and eternity. Violet never married, though she came close once in the 1920s. She fell in love with a fellow crew member, a ship's officer named Jack, who understood her need for the sea because he felt it himself. They planned a future together, talked about retiring to a cottage by the water, where they could watch ships pass without having to be aboard them. But Jack died young in an accident aboard ship, crushed by a shifting cargo net during rough weather in the North Atlantic. Another casualty of a life lived on the water. Another reminder that the sea gives nothing freely and takes payment in ways that cannot be predicted or prevented. After his death, Violet never found anyone else who could compete with her first love, the ocean itself, for in all its beauty and terrible indifference. She retired from active service in 1950, at the age of 63, after more than 4 decades at sea. By then she had sailed over 1 million miles, served on dozens of ships, and witnessed the complete transformation of maritime travel, from the age of steam and elegance to the era of diesel efficiency and mass transportation. The romance was mostly gone from ocean travel, replaced by the practical business of moving people and goods across water with maximum efficiency and minimum fuss. But the 3 ships of her youth, Olympic, Titanic and Britannic, remained the defining experiences of her life, the events that shaped everything that came after. Each disaster had taught her something essential about survival, about human nature, about the arbitrary way fate distributes its gifts and punishments. The Olympic, her first disaster, taught her that even the mightiest vessels were vulnerable to the sea's capricious moods, that engineering marvels could be humbled by simple human error or mechanical failure. The collision with HMS Hawke showed her that disaster could strike without warning, that the difference between routine voyage and catastrophe could be measured in seconds and inches. The Titanic showed her the true cost of human hubris and the arbitrary nature of survival. The unsinkable ship became a monument to the dangers of believing too completely in human mastery over natural forces. That night in the lifeboats taught her that survival often depends more on chance than virtue, that good people die while others live for no reason that human reason can fathom. The Britannic proved that even learning from past mistakes, even incorporating every safety improvement that experience could suggest, could not guarantee protection from future catastrophes. The sea, she learned, keeps its own counsel and follows its own laws, indifferent to human plans and precautions. In her small apartment, surrounded by photographs and mementos from a lifetime spent on the world's oceans, Violet reflects on the question that has haunted her for 6 decades. Why did she survive when so many others did not? She has considered all the possible explanations over the years. Luck certainly played a role, being in the right place at the right time, or perhaps more accurately, being in the wrong place at the right time. Being young and strong and knowing how to swim gave her advantages that many passengers, especially older people and children, lacked. Her training as a stewardess and later as a nurse prepared her to function under pressure when others panicked or froze, but she suspects the real answer is simpler and more mysterious than any of these practical considerations. She survived because someone had to carry the stories forward, to bear witness to what happened on those nights when the sea claimed ships that were supposed to be unsinkable. Someone had to remember the passengers who never made it to the lifeboats, the musicians who played until the end, the crew members who died at their posts, the mothers who gave up their places in boats so their children might live. Someone had to speak for the wounded soldiers who drew their last breaths in hospital ship wards far from home, young men who died believing their sacrifice meant something, even when the wars they fought seemed to solve nothing. Permanently, Violet Jessop became that someone not by choice but by a quirk of fate that placed her on 3 doomed ships at 3 crucial moments in maritime history. She lived so that others would not be forgotten, so that their stories would survive even when their bodies had long since been claimed by the sea. As she writes in her journal, her handwriting still precise despite her advanced age, Violet allows herself one moment of quiet pride. She may not have been famous in the conventional sense, may not have been celebrated in newspapers or remembered in history books, but she was there when it mattered most. She helped when help was desperately needed. She survived when survival seemed impossible. And she used that survival not for personal gain, but to serve others who faced their own moments of crisis. She carried the stories of those who could not tell them themselves, and in doing so, she gave meaning to disasters that might otherwise have been nothing more than statistics in maritime history. On May 5, 1971, Violet Jessop dies peacefully in her sleep, her pen still beside her journal, her story finally complete. Her memoirs, Titanic Survivor, will not be published until 1997, 26 years after her death. By then, James Cameron's film will have made the Titanic disaster famous all over again, and people will be hungry for authentic accounts from those who were actually there, who felt the deck tilt beneath their feet and heard the screams of the dying in the darkness. Violet's story will finally find its audience. Though she will not be alive to see the impact of her words, readers will discover the remarkable tale of the woman who survived not 1 but 3 maritime disasters, the nurse who saved lives while facing death herself, the stewardess who remained calm when the world around her dissolved into chaos and terror. They will learn about the quiet heroism of ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, about the weight of survival and the burden of memory, about a woman who proved that being unsinkable has nothing to do with the strength of steel hulls or the sophistication of safety equipment, and everything to do with the resilience of the human spirit and the determination to keep serving others, even when service carries the risk of witnessing more tragedy than any heart should have to bear. Ask yourself, if you had faced what Violet Jessop faced, would you have had the courage to keep going back to sea? Would you have found the strength to carry the stories of the dead without being crushed by their weight? Would you have remained like her, unsinkable in the ways that truly matter? In the end, that may be the most important question raised by her extraordinary life. Not why some people survive when others do not. That remains one of life's deepest mysteries. But what survivors do with the gift of their survival, how they honor the memory of those who were not so fortunate, how they transform personal tragedy into service to others. Violet Jessop was unsinkable, not because the sea could not claim her. It tried 3 times and came close each time, but because she refused to let the sea's victims be forgotten. In that refusal, in that faithful remembrance, in her determination to serve others, despite having every reason to seek safety on land, she found something better than victory. She found purpose. The waves that carried away the Olympic's innocence, the Titanic's passengers and the Britannic's hope could not wash away her stories or silence her witness. And in the end, perhaps that is the truest form of being unsinkable. Not the ability to survive disaster, but the determination to make sure that survival serves something larger than yourself. That may be the real lesson of Violet Jessop's remarkable life. That true unsinkability lies not in steel and rivets and watertight compartments, but in the human capacity to endure, to serve, to remember, and to ensure that those who cannot speak for themselves are never truly forgotten.